Disclaimer. These stories will contain graphic depictions of horror elements, including, but not limited to, gore, graphic depictions of violence, body horror, murder, just all the horror. So please exercise caution when listening. Good evening. Welcome to Sniper's Creepy Crypt, the spookiest place in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you might never leave. I am Sniper Shadow, and I am here in this our month of the horror and macabre to bring you tales of the utmost terrifying. These tales are not my own. I simply overhear them from passers-by. Sniper's Creepy Crypt is open for 31 days and 31 days only, before it disappears for another year. So join us for some horror from the depths of the hell dimensions. During the summer of my 7th grade year, me and my family decided to take a trip up to Alabama to visit my grandfather's estate. My grandfather had just recently passed away due to a massive heart attack, so unsurprisingly, my family was very distraught. My mother was the executor of the will, so she was in charge of the estate and taking inventory of all my grandfather's belongings. As we pull up to the house, I get an eerie feeling. The house is in a run-down neighborhood. It was 2 stories with a basement. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms on the top floor, and 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom in the basement. It had wood floors and the ceiling was unpainted. The only place in the house where the ceilings were somewhat painted was in my grandparents' bedroom. It had an X pattern in a sequence of patterns across the ceiling. This bedroom was particularly big and had a bathroom in it. It was also the room my grandfather died in. My grandfather was 6'7" and 300 pounds, so I had guessed that was what had attributed to his heart attack. The house's exterior was made of wood and sat on 10 acres of land, another 100 acres if you count the land that was leased. The land was littered with old rusty cars that my grandfather used to collect parts off of. The inside of the house was rustic and the furniture looked like it was bought from Goodwill. It smelled musty, a smell I can't really associate with too many other things. My grandfather built the house with his bare hands, so I had a lot of respect for it. He and my grandmother had spent the first 3 years building the house and living in the basement. The basement smelled even worse than the upstairs. It smelled like old, dead air. The kind of smell you would smell at an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. It had a kitchen and a living area and a bedroom. I liked to spend a lot of time down here snooping through the wide variety of items my grandfather had left down here. From old radios to old police monitors, my grandfather had everything down here. On one particular day, my parents were outside taking inventory on the vast collection of mechanic parts, and I was snooping around in the basement. As I was down there, I started to hear a noise above my head. It sounded like footsteps coming from my grandparents' bedroom. I figured it was one of my parents in there to get something. I shrugged it off and continued my snooping. The sounds never went away, though. It sounded like a crescendo, starting out soft and gradually getting louder, and then starting all over again. It sounded as if they were walking back and forth. I decided to go up and investigate the noise, but no one was up there. I was creeped out, to say the least, so I joined my parents outside, where I stayed for the rest of the day. Fast forward to nighttime, and I was back in the house. I was forced to sleep in my grandparents' bedroom, despite my protest. Luckily, I was sharing the room and bed with my grandmother on my father's side, who happened to join my parents on the trip. My parents would sleep across the hall. Me and my mum got into some sort of argument, and I was forced to go to bed early. I was in this creepy room alone while my grandmother was right outside the bedroom in the living room. She was watching TV. Despite the noise coming from the TV outside the bedroom itself was extremely quiet. It seemed to take on an aura of its own. The bed faces the door going out into the living room, and the bathroom door sat on the right of the bed. So here I was, in this creepy bedroom, laying on my back in bed. As I was laying there, I began thinking about the footsteps I had heard earlier in the day. I didn't like that in the bedroom. The air inside the room seemed suffocating. As I was laying in the bed, I heard a noise inside the bathroom. I lay there motionless with my head turned towards the bathroom. My eyes were locked on that closed door. This bathroom wasn't big at all. It was like the size of a storage closet. I will never forget the noise that I was hearing from that bathroom. It sounded like a gargling sound. It sounded like a choking, gargling sound. I can't really explain how scared I was. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear. Several seconds went by, although it felt like hours, before the sound quit. It fell silent again, even more silent than before. I was still too scared to move. I wanted to scream out to my grandma, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. I rolled over on my side so I could permanently keep my eyes on that door. A few minutes went by before I started to notice something again. The door handle on the door was slowly moving from one side to the other, as if something was trying to open it but couldn't bring themselves to do so. I just stared in complete horror. My mouth was hanging wide open. The latch on the door went through the stop, and the door began to creep open. It was an inward swinging wood frame door, so it would be opening away from me. As the door began to open, all I can think was that I had to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. The door opened about halfway before it stopped abruptly. It was dark in the room, but the TV from the living room outside illuminated the room a little bit. I could see a dark shadow moving around in the bathroom. I couldn't quite make out the shape of it. It looked eternally dark. Sort of like a black hole of darkness. All of a sudden, a face popped out of that darkness. I was horrified. It was my deceased grandmother. Her head and face were showing, but not her body. It was almost as if she were peeking out at me. I was even more weirded out by how close to the floor her head was. It was about an inch underneath the door jamb. Her long, mullet-like hair hung to the side, and her thick glasses just about covered her whole face. Words can't even begin to describe how terrified I was. I contemplated getting out of bed and running out of the room, but the thought of my grandmother reaching out, grabbing my legs and pulling me to my doom quickly pushed the thought out of my mind. So I just laid there and stared at her, and she stared back at me. And then she began to smile. Oh God, that smile. That smile let me know one thing. This was not my grandmother. I don't know who or what that thing was, but it was not my grandmother. The smile had dry caked blood surrounding it. It was pure evil. The head began to move its way up, past the door jamb until it finally stopped at the top of the door, which had to be 7 feet high. Its eyes never leaving mine. It began to creep its way from the side all the way to the middle of the doorway. Its dark body was just about covering the whole door. I couldn't stand it any longer. I closed my eyes and I screamed louder than I have ever screamed before, over and over and over again. Finally, my dad burst through the doorway, followed by my mother and my grandmother. A wave of panic filled their faces as they flicked on the light and looked at my face. I was pale white and staring into space. They began questioning as to what was wrong, but I said nothing. Eventually, they calmed me down enough where I could finally tell them what happened. They first looked at each other, and then back at me. I could tell that they were skeptical, but scared at the same time. My father went and checked the bathroom. Of course, there was nothing in it. My mother finally moved me out of the room into a different bedroom on the other side of the house. I never heard anything else about this incident from my parents. I'm not even sure they believed me. All I know is that talking about this 10 years later still gives me the creeps and sends chills down my spine. Probably because one disturbing fact that I learned a couple of years from the incident when the house finally sold. My grandmother didn't just die. She committed suicide in that very bedroom that I was staying in. A gunshot to the chest. I was very close to my grandmother, so I know that she wouldn't do anything to scare me like that. Whatever that thing was, I hope that I never meet it again. After learning of my grandmother's suicide and that demon I met in her bedroom, I eventually came to a revelation. I believe that my grandfather had an unseen factor that contributed to his heart attack. That monster that I encountered in the bedroom is that culprit that had gone unnoticed and ultimately led to my grandfather's demise. That concludes our tale for today. Return tomorrow for another horror-filled experience. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going, thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Creepy Crypt. Remember, traveler, eyes ahead, don't look back. Until next time, good night and good luck.